and fins. Schubbe, that's scales. That is the only condition that it needs to have to be kosher. And in fact, in all generations, be'emes, one of the reasons why one of the Yiddish foods is fish, because wherever Yidden were, in whichever Golis, whichever end of Russia, China, who knows, and they couldn't get kosher food, but kosher fish they could always get. Always there was a possibility to get fish of a type of fish that has scales and fins. And in fact, up to the present day, a fish, if you go to a fish shop and you see a fish, that you recognize the fish. And it's stressing, it's emphasizing it is very important you recognize, you know which fish you're talking about. It can be salmon, it may be a carp, it can be whatever. But a fish, heilbutt, kabeljau, whatever. But it's a fish that you recognize. If it's a fish that you know, that you recognize, you know that it's got scales, go ahead, buy it, enjoy yourself. No difference if the fish is alive, if it's been knocked over its head and dead, frozen, it is always kosher. One little point is important. I used to go to buy fish in Amsterdam. Used to go sometimes to the market to buy the fish. Used to go to Albert Heijn or wherever you buy your fish. One little point is important to take into your mind. If you ask them to fillet the fish for you, to cut the fish, and you know, in most fish shops in Holland, they also sell non-kosher fish, paling, non-kosher fish, and other sea fruit, crabs, lobsters, etc. The fish shop sells many of those wonderful things. What about the knives? The cutting board? If it is not cleaned, then you have, when you come home, you have to wash your fish. So if you go there, you check, you see, you know your fishmonger, you've gone to him so many times, he's got a special knife for one type of fish, a different knife for a different type of fish, then it's no issue, no problem. But if it's a regular fishmonger that cuts every type of fish with his knife, on the surface of the knife can be fat from a different fish, can be bits of fish stuck to it. So when you come home, you have to take the fish under the tap and rub it with your hands to make sure it is properly clean. But except for that, fish is fish. Kosher fish is kosher fish. No issue. You can use it, eat it, and enjoy it. As I emphasized before, you must know the name of the fish. Not the name, the type of fish. Because there are some situations where you can get into trouble. Let me try and explain. Not every animal that has got scales is a fish. I don't know, I've never, even here in Israel, I do not see many snakes. But in the zoo, I have seen some snakes. I think they've got scales. But snakes are not fish. So not everything that has got a scale is called a fish. Very, very interesting. In the Mishnah, there is a statement. Every fish that has got scales, automatically you don't have to check if it's got fins. Why not? Because every fish that has got scales automatically also has fins. So the Tosfos Yom Tov, Rabbi Yom Tov Heller, lived 400 years ago, writes a question on this Mishnah. He knows, he's from the zoo or whatever, that there's a fish that has got scales, but 4 legs instead of fins. It's got legs. Now, is this a kosher fish or not? If you follow the Mishnah says everything that has got scales has got fins. So if everything that's got scales has got fins, then of course those 4 legs must be 4 fins. It's got a long discussion. Can legs be fins and can fins be legs? In the end, he decides, no. That ruling that everything with scales automatically also has fins is only for fish. But that's not a fish, it's an animal. Maybe it's a crocodile, I don't know, I didn't see it. But only things that have got scales, only things that have got fish that have got scales have got fins. But animals that have scales don't have fins, they have legs. And so therefore there is such a possibility of certain fish creatures. In English we would call them not fish, but sea creatures. I don't know, I'm a British man, not Scottish, and I've never met the Loch Ness monster. I don't know whether it's got scales or not, but it's a monster and it's not a fish. So, important to know what exactly, if we don't know, what can be the problems. Eels don't have scales and don't have fins, so that we know clearly. Very lately, here in Israel, I was confronted by a question. In the kashrut branch, some importer wanted to import from Thailand a fish that is called in English a snakehead fish. No, snakehead, not a snake, it's a snake head. And it's a snakehead fish. So I asked him, no problem. I don't expect it's a problem. Does it have scales? Yeah, it has scales. Does it have fins? Yeah, it has fins. Can you send me a picture? Yeah, of course. Sent me a picture, beautiful long fish with scales and fins. And the first moment, no problem at all. Scales, fins, no, that's the best. But I started doing a little bit of research, and I found out that this exciting fish is an amphibious fish. Very interesting. It can breathe. A fish that can breathe. It has lungs. Usual fish breathe through the gills, through the ears. They absorb oxygen from the water, and that's how they live. They can't live out of the water because they don't have an ability to absorb oxygen only via they pull in water through the gills, and then they extract oxygen from the water. But there are a few fish that have a double breathing system. They have a breathing system, they breathe oxygen from water, but they have an ability to breathe normal oxygen. Now, this snakehead fish has got an ability. It rolls on the land and can live a few days out of the water. And when it smells, when the water, what happens is in the summer in Thailand, the water can get very warm, too hot for the fish. So it goes out of the water to cool. It finds mud and it rolls in the mud. And it can even travel 2-3 kilometers till it finds cooler water. And like that, it survives. Oh, is this a fish or is it not a fish? I've never heard of fish. I've heard of crocodiles that are animals swimming, but I've never heard of fish that don't swim. Fish out of water? Nah. So, first they put it on hold and said, Mama, no import yet. No hechsher. And I started investigating. In fact, many Rabbonim of 100, 200 years ago already dealt with this problem, that there are fish that are not fish. A fish that lives out of water is not a fish. Fish live in water. And a fish out of water is not. So it's got scales, it's got fins, so long as it looks like a fish, maybe even tastes like a fish, but it isn't a fish. What is it? It's something else, but it's not a fish. Interesting. I looked up, tried to find out more about this. There are different types. There's a catfish, snakehead fish, mud kipper, it's called. I don't know. Quite a few different types of fish. There's a fish in China that comes out of the water. It rolls itself in a cake of mud and can live for 2 or 3 years out of the water in a hard block of mud. And after a few years, when it rains enough, the mud dissolves and it goes back into the water. And I've saw pictures, films, how they dig out of the mud, big block, poke out, whoops, and out jumps an alive fish. So all these fish are not fish. Why I'm mentioning it? Because during my investigations for kashrut on the snakehead fish in Israel, they told me they've started exporting this also to Europe. It's a large fish, it's a healthy fish, and in Europe they're already starting selling this. So next time you go to the market and you see a cheap fish called snakehead fish, and the fishmonger tells you, oh, it's very special fish, newly come from Thailand, be careful. It might not be a fish after all. It might be something completely different. Maybe it's a cow. That is about these fish that are not fish. But then, of course, we have many other sea creatures, which none of them are fish. All these lobsters and other crawly things that crawl around in the nice big shops in Amsterdam, waving their legs at you when you walk past them. All these are treif, but they don't bother the fish, meaning even if they live together in one aquarium with the fish together, it stays kosher. The kosher fish doesn't become treif because his burman is a lobster. So that is not an issue in kashrut, except for, as mentioned before, the knife, the cutting board, and these things we have to be careful that they should be kosher. Just a moment, turn over the page. this whole thing that I mentioned till now is only discussing raw, non-cooked, non-salted, non-smoked, raw, whole fish. Whole fish alive, whole fish dead, whole fish frozen, whole fish. One needs to mention the next problem. I love looking for problems. That's my job. I get paid for looking for problems. So, what happens with filet? So again, like I mentioned before, if the customer asks the shop to make filet, and even if you ask them to take off the skin, take a whole fish for you, cut it into filet, take off the skin in front of you, then it's no problem. You have seen that the fish is a kosher fish, and they have taken off the skin in front of you. But if you go onto the market or into a fish shop, no difference, whether it's in Albert Heijn or in Jumbo or 2000, whatever. But if you walk into the fish shop and they see a whole tray full of filet, and it says on the top, a nice thing, filet from kabeljau filet, kosher filet. But there's no way of really knowing that it's kosher. You didn't see that it is kosher. So you have to, of course, trust. You have to trust the fishmonger that he knows what he's talking about. And in halacha, that isn't so simple anymore. Because if he's got a few fillets of a different fish, well, what's the difference? Fillet is fillet, fish is fish. And the cooking time of both is the same. So he might not tell you 100% truth. And therefore, when you buy filet without skin, you should not, if possible, you should only take filet with skin on one side, because the filet only has skin on one side. And therefore, filet, usually in a local fishmonger, you should not buy without skin. There is another issue with filet, with frozen filet. Frozen filet, even sometimes with skin or without skin, when you buy in a recognized factory, big factory, they won't sell you on a packet of frozen filet and it says on it one type of fish. They won't. The law will get after them very fast if they put the wrong name of the fish on the bag. But there is another problem. I'm sure anyone who has ever cooked, let's take meat, especially the Israeli meat somehow is worse, not the same quality as the Dutch meat. But you go to the butcher shop and you buy a nice big piece of meat and you put it into your pan and you start roasting it, and in front of your eyes it starts shriveling up. Ooh. And by the time you finish with it, 50% of it has gone into the air. What happened? Where has it all gone to? Yes, there's a lot of water, meat from nature has got a lot of water in it. And when you roast it or cook it, in fact, the water drains out, the cells drain out the water, and you lose different meats, different qualities, different ratio. I don't want to go into that. But frozen meat, loses much more water than fresh meat. And the same applies to fish. Frozen fish loses a lot of water. The reason being, maybe I will lose a few minutes by explaining to you what happens. The body is full of cells, tiny little cells, millimeters. But in every cell, there's a bit of water. When you freeze the water in the cells, you freeze the whole fish. The water expands a bit and the cells break. The cell walls break. Later, when you take out the fish out of the freezer, you thaw the fish. And before you even started cooking, a flood of water comes out of the fish. And from your nice fat fillet, you're left with a paper-thin, shriveled up fillet. So people don't like defrosting and thawing fish fillet. But the Chinese are clever. The Chinamen, they started, in Israel they also do it, and also in Holland. They started injecting into the fish different chemicals that fill it up with water and other chemicals that when you defrost it, it stays the same. So not only do they gain, the Chinese are very good at that. Firstly, you gain because a kilo of fish is only 800 grams of fish, and another 200 grams of water that they've managed to inject into it. But that water stayed inside. It happens also in Holland. They call it in Holland tumbling. But it's injection with little tiny needles. They inject into the fish. Now listen carefully. They don't inject water, because if you inject water, it'll come out again. So in Holland, there's quite a strong governmental control what happens. In Holland, they inject phosphates. And sometimes if you look carefully on the small print on your fillet, it just says 80% fish. And then, 80% fish, where's the other 20? Then you have to start guessing what the other 20 are. But in Holland, it's quite safe to eat. It is phosphates. For Pesach, it can be a problem because sometimes they can add starch in it as well to bind the water inside the fish that it shouldn't go out. In China, they found cleverer ways of doing this. They inject sometimes protein. Proteins are healthy, but they bind like egg white. When you cook it, it goes hard. Egg white is a protein. Eiwit is proteins, eiwit. So when they try to inject into the fish protein, eiwit, so when you cook it, it stays inside, doesn't go out. Where do you get cheap proteins from? Yes, we mentioned one of my last shiurim that you don't throw anything away, you recycle whatever you can. All the fish factories, all the afal, all the waste of the fish factories get sent to a company that produces protein from the waste of the fish. Then this waste fish, protein, eiwit, gets injected back into the fish. And these clever people, when you take it into a labor to see if there's anything added, No, you can't recognize. Because fish and fish, you can't recognize fish and fish. So it's all the same. And so, therefore, they gain a lot. They can call it 100% fish, and no one can prove that it's not 100%. They can charge for a full 100 kilo, even though it's only 800 grams of fish and 200 grams of rubbish. And the housewife is happy because the thick fillet stays a thick fillet. But in kashrut, this is a serious problem. Very serious problem. Because you're having fish with the ayvit inside. Who knows where it's coming from? And so people ask always, can we buy fish fillet in the local shops? If you're buying a local fish, meaning a local company, a European company, and it doesn't say on it, produced in the Far East, you're happy, it'll be okay. But if it is some Chinese fillet, I would be careful. So truncheon, no problem, cut. The same thing, because there's no practice of adding in things. A whole fish is no problem. But fish fillet, I will be careful about. As far as I remember, on the kashrut list, there are some company names of which companies are not a problem. If you want, you can always ask the local rabbinat if they're okay or not. But it's an important point to keep in mind that fish filet, even if it says on it which type of fish it is, it can be a problem. Let me continue with other issues in fish. The first thing we have to think about is bishul akum, bishul nochri, meaning something which is cooked by a non-Jewish person. According to halacha, we cannot eat food which is cooked by a non-Jewish person, which no difference whether it is in a restaurant. So even the best McDonald's restaurant, that pure vegetarisch, a pure vegetarian restaurant, vegan, they don't have milk, they don't have fish, just vegetables. But the potatoes cooked in that just vegan restaurant is not kosher, because potatoes cannot be consumed raw. Potatoes, baked potatoes, can be served by a chasna, and those are the two preconditions. And it is cooked by a non-Jewish person. It is not kosher, and therefore it is not kosher. You cannot eat in that restaurant cooked potatoes. Sometimes we have to always keep these things in mind. We have had many, not only in Holland, also here in Israel, I've had this issue with elderly people that have to have a help at home, a nurse or a woman who comes to help, and the woman does some cooking for them. And she's just cooking some eggs, and just cooking some potatoes, and just frying a bit of fish. Just. That's just not kosher. Just not kosher. So, anyway, that is called bishul akum, bishul nochri. Interesting enough, smoking, not cigarettes, smoked fish is not considered bishul nochri. So, gerookt makreel or smoked salmon, heilbutt, etc., forel, many smoked fish have no issue of bishul nochri. So the first principle, in principle, smoked fish shouldn't be a big problem. But the rabbi always has to find some problem. So, yes, little bit careful one has to be. What happens, again, not in Holland, but happens in some other countries, a little bit further away. These fish are salted before smoking. How do you salt them? You put it into a salt bath, a big bath full of salt water. You put in 100 fish at a time. You leave them there for 2-3 hours, get salted, and then you pop them into the smoking oven. Now, what happens in a company that also makes smoked eel, smoked parling, or some other type of fish that is non-kosher? Can happen. I'm sure that smoked lobsters taste wonderful, and therefore I'm sure many non-Jewish people, crispy legs of smoked crabs. Okay, not my appetite. Anyway, so smoked, if they share the same salt bath, then it could be that the salt water, the brine, is non-kosher because they have salted in it non-kosher fish. I have visited in Europe quite a few factories. In Holland, I've visited quite a few factories. And I must tell you, in Holland, it won't happen because they are very careful. Can you imagine if you're going to buy some smoked salmon and it tastes like a mackerel? Smoked mackerel. Ah, salmon! Salmon is very sensitive, very delicate fish. And if the smoked salmon will start smelling and tasting like mackerel, you won't sell one of them. And therefore, they're very careful. They don't mix different types of fish. So they have maybe on the ovens, but it's cold. Usually it's cold smoking. But in the salt water, there's rarely an issue in Holland or in Central Europe that they're going to share the same thing for two different types of fish. I can hardly see it happening. Sorry, it's falling off. I can hardly see this happening, at least not in our countries. But I'm sure when you go a little bit further east, you have to go till China. You can stop a little bit earlier, whether it's in Vietnam or in Thailand or in any of those countries. I wouldn't be sure that there it is all the same. And therefore, one has to be careful even by buying smoked fish, to make sure that this company does really have high hygiene standards and high cleanliness standards, that they wouldn't salt the fish together as two different types of fish, a kosher and non-kosher fish together. The same applies for smoked salmon. Smoked salmon is a little bit of a worse problem because the smoked mackerel has got the skin on it. And on one side the skin, both sides, a whole smoked fish, a smoked salmon, smoked mackerel, filet, has got skin on it. And if you look at the skin, you can see the scales, or at least the markings of the scales. So therefore, that is not a problem of the type of fish. But when you buy smoked salmon, zalm, there you don't get the skin unless you're really buying a whole side of a fish, which is quite expensive. But if you're buying normal smoked salmon, it's not going to have any skin on it. So can you be sure that this is a kosher fish? Interesting enough, I heard from my grandfather about this, that there are no commercially sold pink meat flesh, pink meat fish that are non-kosher. So if you see a red meat fish, a pink, not red, pink meated fish, meaning the color of salmon, of zalm. So if you see a fish the color of zalm, there are no other fish with this colored meat that are non-kosher. So therefore you can rely on that it is a kosher fish. There are sometimes added things to the fish, to the salmon, to the zalm. They add in flavorings a little bit, spices, which can sometimes be an issue. But there are many zalm factories in Europe that have kashrut. And as far as I remember, again, on the list of kashrut, there are numbers and ways of names of factories and numbers of factories that have checked that these factories do not use any non-kosher spices or flavors to their fish, to their salmon. But how can I give a shiur without discussing herring? In Holland, not to discuss herring. But I'm sure none of you eat herring with skin, except when you go to Denmark and eat the alive ones. Alive, then they still have the skin on it. But when we buy them, no skin left. So what do? So the few years, or the many years that I lived in Holland, and of course, I couldn't have a Shabbos without herring. That was impossible. But we used to go to the Albert Heijn. We used to order fish with skin, and they used to skin it in front of us. So he also used to know when my wife comes, she wants some herring. It was all prepared. They skinned it. We saw that it was with the skin. They took off the skin, skinned it for us. The knives were cleaned. Clean knives, no problem. That's the best. If you do it that way, you can become a rabbi. But not everyone can do it that way. And apparently, I spoke to Rabbi Just about it, and he told me that the minhag in Holland is to eat herring bought, if it's pure herring, without anything added. Very careful, because when you have already azain added to it, all sorts of different questions come. So pickled herring are not, but that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about herring, not pickled herring. So herring, he claimed, was no problem, because it is the prestige of the Dutch, the control that the government has over these things, to make sure that nothing is added and that no one takes a different type of fish and calls it herring. God forbid if such a thing would happen. So that's why in Holland, one can easily go into any fish shop if nothing is added. Nothing is added. Very careful. So we're talking about herring, pure herrings. Why am I emphasizing pure herrings? Because in Beis HaMedrash, we a few times had the issue that the herring was bought with onions, chopped onions on the sides. Chopped onions. Not that onions need to have fins and scales. That not. But onions can be a problem. I'll explain to you very shortly why. Because the knife that he cuts the onions with can be a treif and a knife. For example, in a long time ago, in history, before Purim times, before Corona started, I can hardly remember, but I used to fly on planes. I used to travel quite a lot. I used to go by plane around the world for kashrut. Long time ago, 6 months ago. And many times I had a glass of Coke, and they used to ask me, do you want a slice of lemon in your Coke? What should I say? Yes or no? Can I eat a slice of lemon on the plane? Oh, it's nothing, a slice of lemon. According to halacha, if you take a non-kosher knife and you cut something sharp, like a lemon, or, yes, an onion, or garlic, or a chrein, or whatever else, something sharp, it becomes treif from the knife. So therefore, on the plane, I can't know who and where and when they cut these lemons. And what type of knife did they use for cutting the lemon? Was it the same knife that they cut the steak? I can't know. So I said, sorry, thank you, I'll manage without. So that was lemons. What about onions? I know there are many little shops on the Bautefeldetlaan selling herring. Does he cut it with his pocket knife, the onions? Who knows? Possibly. I never asked him. So if he's got a knife that he only uses for onion and never for anything else, then it will be kosher. But if he uses his kitchen knife or his pocket knife that he cuts his sausages when he wants to make a sandwich, terrible. So therefore, the onions that are with the herring can be serious problems. And therefore, I'm mentioning again, herring as herring and nothing else except for herring. So herring in Holland, the minhag is to eat it even though it does not have skin on it. But all other fish, we are very makpid. Always you buy filet with skin, not without skin, because you cannot know whether it is a kosher fish. The only way you can recognize if it is a kosher fish is with skin. But then let's move forward, fast forward. What about cans? Cans. Tuna cans. Sardine. Anchovy. Sardelle. Who knows what? Name it. You name it. Salmon in the can. Are these cooked? Are they bishul akum or not? So, of course, many hechsherim, if you buy a can of tuna that is produced with a hechsher, got a nice hechsher on it, then I can assure you that the mashkiach has traveled to Thailand, to China, to wherever it is, to Timbuktu, and have switches on the fire or lights the oven to make sure it is cooked by a heat. But plain halacha, I mentioned before that smoke is permitted. So smoked fish is not called cooked in halacha. The many poskim say that steam is like smoke. So like a smoked fish is permitted, a steamed fish will also be permitted because it is a steamed equals smoked. Now, I have visited many different companies that produce cans of tuna. None of them have a little pot that you put in a piece of tuna and you cook it on the fire. These are very large rooms, where in a room fit thousands of tuna fish, full of steam, hot steam, and the hot steam cooks the fish. Now, if hot steam is compared to hot smoke, so if hot smoke is permitted, hot steam is also permitted. And that is the reason why tuna fish can be consumed even sometimes in factories that does not have a hechsher on them. Based on that is the reason why I permitted the John West tuna, for example, it's not done with hashkocha. I visit the factories a few times a year, but I do not light the ovens there. But it's the reason it is permitted is based on the heter that smoke is the same, steam is the same as smoke. But one needs to have a little bit of a hechsher, because the other problem I did not address, there's no skin in the cans. So how do you know for sure that it is really tuna? And that's what the Rav has to check, because maybe it's dolphins. Dolphins are also quite large fish, more or less the same size as a tuna. Tuna sometimes a bit bigger even than the dolphins. Quite big fish, as tall as a person sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. But when I go to the factories that produce tuna fish, that is one of the things that I check. How strict do the employees in the company check to make sure not a single different type of fish comes into the factory? And usually this is manually done, that some person takes the fish in his hands and checks, is it the right fish or the wrong fish? And if it's the wrong fish, it gets thrown back into the sea. It happens on the ship. I've been on the ships already. I traveled to Mauritius just to get onto the ship to see on the fish catching ship how they check for the fish, whether it is a kosher fish or non-kosher fish. Because on the large big nets that catch the fish, maybe different types of fish get caught together with the school of tuna fish. According to law, they're not allowed to be anywhere near dolphins, but not dolphins, but mistakes happen and different types of fish get into the net. But someone stands there and checks every single fish to make sure that not a single different species of fish gets onto that ship. And when they unload from the fish, the government sends someone to check again to make sure that it's 100% only tuna fish. And in the company, in the factory again, there's a third check and sometimes a fourth check. So there are many times checked to make sure that only tuna fish get into the factory. And that is the reason why we can't permit tuna fish without having a constant mashkiach there checking. There are other types of canned fish that we eat, sardines. But the schools of sardines, when they catch a whole shoal, a whole school of fish, there are no other fish there. I once saw a film how tiny little sardines kill a different type of fish that got mixed into that school. They pressed together and they squeezed them to death. Millions of little tiny fish squeezed the large fish and till it died. So when they catch sardines, there are no other species of fish together with the sardines. And that's why we are allowed to buy sardines of well-known companies that wouldn't mix in anything else. These are, again, they are permitted for Bishul Nochri. There is no issue of Bishul Akum on sardines for a different reason. I have never been by a chasna that they have served sardines by the chasna. No one serves sardines by a chasna. And since no one serves sardines by a chasna, it does not fall under the halachot of Bishul Akum. And therefore, sardines are permitted for Bishul Akum, and sardines do not have an issue. Sardines do not have an issue of Bishul Nochri. And what, yes, one should not buy skinned sardines. Some, what is shellfish liver? I don't know. That is fish tran, cod liver oil. Is that what you're talking about? Nay, you can put on your you can unmute yourself and now here.
Okay, that my wife's coming here. Okay.
Schelvislever is gewoon de lever.
Een lever, dat wel.
Ja. En what about that?
Schelvisch.
Lever, ja.
Ja, maar schelvisch is een kosher vis of niet?
Ja.
Ja.
Dat een kosher fish type is, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
I remember when we were kids, we used to have cod liver oil. That was something very terrible to taste, but you had to take that. If not,
No.
But that's something else.
That's something else.
That's
something else. Schelvischlever. Smaak? Is it lekker?
Lekker.
Okay, I'll have to taste it.
You have to buy it in Holland, by the way.
I'm in the wrong place. You'll have to wait till after the corona.
Yeah, good. Make a note, okay?
Okay. Schelvischlever. Okay, that's go.
That's lovely. Yes, it's allowed.
Okay, but let's get quickly back to our other cans of fish. Our cans of fish. So the sardine, the sardellen, etc. One should buy with skin, not without skin, because without skin is a problem. Anchovies don't have skin in the cans anymore. They are very thin, tiny little strips. They are very special in taste, and I have heard of old Rabbonim that the minhag was to eat anchovies even though they don't have skin, because they are recognizable that this is anchovies. It's a very special strips that they have, and therefore it is kosher. Although I once heard years ago there they were caught once a factory that were making strips of animal meat that
Yeah.
looked like anchovies and put it into the cans. But still, the halacha doesn't change. Anchovies are permitted, even though they don't have skin. It is permitted to eat anchovies. Of course, we have to check that the other ingredients are kosher, but that is it. Okay, I think my time is coming up.
Yeah.
I haven't finished everything that is about fish, but maybe next time I will talk a bit more about that. Just a quick question, Paul. Which
Yeah.
fish was it? The a difference in minhag between Amstel